it's my turn, and I hope that what I'm going to be sharing with you fits somehow in your own research plans or current work, and if not, I hope you will share your own ideas or different takes on what I'm saying at the end of my talk, so that I can also benefit from your presence here. I was asked to present on my current work, but in general on the topic that is becoming quite a discipline in itself. New media, activism, social change. When I thought about how to frame this research, I obviously started doing what we were all trying to do, and that is looking to existing publications and debates. And I was reminded again of how incredibly fast and intensely growing this field is. And obviously from the presentation and from the topics of the other lectures, you will understand that the Arab revolutions, Arab Spring, Arab uprisings are, I think, the main engine of having led to this growth and we could also say fashionable discipline on media and activism. But that will come back along the presentation. You can't really discuss the theoretical or analytical approaches to media and activism in one sense, because research about social implications of the internet actually occurs in many different disciplines and many different contributions and publications about this relation between media and social change speak from their own specializations that span fields as diverse as race and gender studies, anthropology, economics, international relations, and what have you. But I think it's especially the focus on political activism from a particular sociology perspective in scholarship, particularly the perspective known as social movements theories that inspired innumerable writings and will also be one of my sources in what I will be discussing the coming hour. And as I said, it's no exaggeration to say that the Arab revolutions became an instant example of this particular focus, this focus between internet and activism. I stopped counting. In the beginning, I was enthusiastic and started collecting articles and contributions, but I stopped doing that because the number of academic books and articles, conferences, but also, interestingly, foreign-funded public diplomacy projects looking particularly at new media and social change, but also, of course, programs on television and radio, special supplements in newspapers and magazines are just dazzlingly. The amount of that is, I think, very telling from an epistemological point of view, which is another discussion, but I think that in itself is worth the whole debate. And of course, there is a very logic reason for this with regards to the Arab world or Middle East and North Africa. There's a whole debate about whether we should call it the Middle East or MENA, but again, that's another discussion. For the sake of clarity, I will refer to the Arab world or the Middle East. There's a very logical reason because we've seen, we've been historical witnesses to the fact that new media, politics, and radical change overlap so clearly at these crossroads from the experiences that are emanating from the Arab world. And in the last few years, I've been collecting case studies and doing interviews with people and just, enjoying also the production of fascinating stuff online. And we can see that there are so many sites of contestation in cyberspace, and there's so much creativity emerging, political mashups, which are mediating political protest, but at the same time are self-mocking and are also taking everything with a grain of salt. We've seen all of those mediations, and what is interesting is that most of them refuse to be labeled as purely entertainment. Most of the production that we see coming out of the airport online have particular political measures in them, even if they're not coming with concrete demands. I think how I look at it is that these are like online narratives. They're like online discourses, online visual discourses that basically are in the midst of chronicling, giving a chronicle of a very messy, unfinished and difficult struggle. Which is why also we need to always be aware in which tense we speak. Do we speak in the past tense, in the contemporary, in the future? Because what we're discussing, what I'm discussing, is stuff that's happening, that's ongoing. There is no past tense with regards to the Arab uprisings, although there are many commentators and scholars who think that that is the case, who basically think that Arab revolutions are finished. That they started in 2011, didn't succeed, and now we're back to zero, or even worse off than we were. That is not my position. And I hope I'll be showing you in the work, and I will share with you why. But in any case, what did we learn from all these books and articles and programs? I'm afraid we didn't learn that much. I think, to be honest, a lot of good work, empirically grounded work, is actually coming out only now. Last year we've seen some interesting ethnographic-based studies and some books coming out, but until now, most of the work produced was kind of sort of celebratory in tone or one-dimensional, as in sort of journalistic style, right? In fact, everyone seemed to be a Middle East expert in 2011. And everyone also wanted to have sort of final answer to what led to the uprisings, what's going to happen with the uprisings. And a lot of those shortcut analysis, basically, the shortcut analysis of the Arab Spring itself, a very problematic shortcut term, created also a sense of intellectual frustration, as Tariq Sabri calls it. And a quick overview of the work that was published in a lot of the communication and media disciplines about the Arab Spring, in quotes, show two remarkable features. One is what I already mentioned, the sheer volume. It's really remarkable. I mean, it's unprecedented if you compare it to any other sort of social phenomena in the last few decades. Maybe some people would argue that it's comparable to the explosion of writings and projects and even new disciplines after the 1968 student revolts in Europe. But apart from that, the sheer volume of work is remarkable. The second thing that I found remarkable from a critical point of view is that there was quite, and there still is quite, a large lack of engagement with critical theory. For instance, for me, a very basic starting point in anything to do with social change in society is political economy. And there's really very little on the role of the media and Arab revolutions with regards to how it is shaped and conditioned or even impeded by political economy. And what is interesting is that it's also then reflecting a gap between mainstream academic discourse and production of knowledge and what is happening outside the mainstream. Because at the same time, in the recent years, we have seen a really interesting popular emergence of very interesting radical critiques. A lot of Marxist literature. Zizek is like a pop star almost, Badiou and other interesting writings. So what we see is there's a sort of widespread gap occurring between mainstream scholarship and a sort of new generation of scholarship interacting between existing, long-standing academics and public intellectuals and a young generation of scholars and intellectuals who basically are much less burdened with the taboo of what you can call systemic analysis. One interesting example, for instance, is the online journal Jadaliya. If you look at Jadaliya, what they produce, it's top-notch academic, intellectual, organic intellectual stuff that actually speaks beyond what the mainstream imposes on us. So if you're interested in this field and this type of work, I really do suggest to go to Jadaliya. They have a special section on media, and they divided the whole region according to country, so you can even just specifically look at a certain country. They've recently included Turkey, so really fascinating platform. So I want to pause here before diving into the media, because when I looked at your program, I figured out, rather than adding the same kind of stuff on the Arab world and social media, which I'm sure other people will discuss as well, I would like to actually maybe offer a way to fill that gap that I just mentioned. And that is to actually look at the objective circumstances that are so important for understanding contemporary developments and dilemmas, but are usually overlooked or found boring to analyze the role of the media, which, in my view, for the Middle East, are two things: empire/imperialism and political economy/capitalism. Without understanding how these dynamics work and reproduce themselves on the ground, we are left with a very thin understanding of the social and political implications of the media. And so we need to, I think, zoom out and rewind a bit and place these uprisings, these Arab uprisings, in a particular moment of history. These uprisings exploded at the backdrop of a global crisis of capitalism. A global crisis of capitalism we have not seen since the 1930s, and that's so important and requires us to at least pause and take a look at that. We've seen, we've experienced, especially for us in Europe, how national economies were burdened very heavily during the credit boom, and how the national economies were basically flooded with cheap loans, and how they boomeranged and basically led to a major fracture of the financial sector. And we saw the peak of that in the summer of 2008. So this immense public debt that accumulated as a result of bailouts, basically states bailing out banks, showed that something actually quite interesting, namely that the state stepped in. So it was really mesmerizing to observe the return of state economy narratives expressed by the most outspoken free market ideologues, the most sharply outspoken people who would write to us in the Financial Times that the state should retreat and the economy and the market does its own work. Suddenly we heard that the state has to step in and bail out. So the banks got away without being seriously disciplined. So as the crisis then quickly spread across the globe, both inside the center and from the center to the periphery, we could see how one after the other, the weaklings were sacrificed and the stronglings were bailed out with public money. So an unrestrained fiscal stimuli started to be paid for by not some imaginary miraculous pot of money, but by emptying the pensions and public healthcare accounts with austerity measures. I live in England, and we've seen what that meant in August 2011, when riots broke out and nearly brought the country to a halt. So the double standards here, combined with the reduced living standards, created a growing political and now almost permanent instability. And liberalism lost its hegemony. And it explains also the questioning of neoliberalism as a dominant ideology. So this is a paradigmatic shift. And it also is a shift which starts to question the role of the state itself. And this questioning is not just intellectual debates like us in the university, but this questioning was also expressed through sharp instances of class struggle and class power. Strikes, picket lines, boycott, what have you. So we've seen a revival of working class resistance even in places we never thought we would see that. For instance, in Wisconsin, just a month after the world sort of saw the Arab world collapsing or roiling in revolution, public sector workers in Wisconsin decided to occupy their county hall. And within that sort of atmosphere, Occupy Wall Street started. And the idea of a 99% versus a 1% resonated beyond audiences they had intended. Even mainstream media started to write about it with question marks. Maybe they're right. And soon after Occupy Wall Street, many of its clones, for instance the one in Oakland, really showed that it is much more than lifestyle politics, that it actually had a strong class base. Oakland is really interesting because their activists and workers joined forces and closed down parts of the ports, which is phenomenal. We haven't seen much of that in our mainstream news, but it really was a historical instance. And probably that's why also it was incredibly susceptible to police brutality. We've seen some of that, I think. I think most of you must have remembered seeing images of protesters being beaten up, and there's, I think, a famous photo of the cops at UC Davis pepper spraying students who were striking. So this is the background